I am a detective for 10 years. I am assigned to help the FBI with the most brutal cases they have to offer. It affects my everyday life and relationships. I might have to cancel a date with my wife, or I can't make my son's football game. And to give you an idea of the situation, I just missed my daughter's graduation last week. I am chasing probably one of the worst type of serial killers America has ever seen. His name is Brian Wilson, but goes by the name of the Phantom Killer. He has the name because no one knows what he actually looks like these days. You might wonder what I meant by that, but Brian has an incredible way of disguising his appearance using latex and special effects makeup. He would have no problem throwing together a female face if he liked. So that is the worst thing about him, other than the brutal way he murders his victims. The FBI, police, and myself have no idea what he looks like. I had to make my wife and kids' safety my number one priority. I never take any precautions with Brian, so had a cop car to pick them up and bring them to a safe house because something very big is about to go down. You will learn what it is in a few moments. I waited until the cop car pulled up and an African American cop pulled down his window and said, "Hey there, sir, I'll have your wife and kids put in the address you were given and give you a call when we are there." I thanked the officer and walked back into my house to get ready for a busy night. I think I might have hit a break though, as Brian, one of the most notorious killers America has ever seen, had emailed a guy who does a hugely successful podcast and offered him an interview. The rules were his though, which were 1. No cops or anyone gets told until the interview is over. 2. It won't be over Skype or the phone, etc. It would have to be face to face. 3. It would have to be in a place chosen by Brian. The podcast guy goes by the name of Fred Jackson. His podcast is a true crime podcast called Fred's True Crime Podcast. He averages about 1 million listeners a week. He is hot property, which is mostly the reason Brian chose him to be interviewed. I wondered though, what was behind this podcast? What had Brian in mind? I guessed no doubt he had evil intentions. Or else maybe he was just feeding his ego, which was evil of course, because his ego was built on leaving trails of blood behind. Fred of course told me about this podcast interview, and we discussed it with the police and several FBI agents. This guy wasn't just any ordinary fugitive. He is probably one, if not the most dangerous fugitives in the United States of America. We gave Fred a tracking device, and over many different ideas thrown around, we came to the conclusion the best place he could have his tracking device was inside the sole of his shoe. Me and several others will have a live GPS tracking device, knowing where he is exactly. We knew that we could not be seen, or it would be all over for Fred. When we were tailing him, we were using a public bus we got a loan of with actors and actresses in it. We also didn't want them in danger, so still made the driver know he had to stay at least 10 places behind Fred, as Brian more than likely would be with him in the car when we made the move. Fred got a time and place, 10 p.m. behind an old warehouse just out of town. We obviously knew the bus couldn't drive in there, so we had people on foot, hiding, ready for them since 7 p.m, carefully making sure their presence wasn't known. I was hidden behind a tree, looking directly at the back of the warehouse, when, as expected, on the dot of 10, I saw Fred's car arrive. He got out and checked his watch, making sure he was on time. I waited in anticipation. There was a shout from behind a barrel at the side of the warehouse. "Hey there, Fred! Thanks for this big break, giving me some time on your famous murder radio show." What happened next, I couldn't believe my eyes. Fear gathered up in my chest, and my heart beat so fast I could hear it thumping in my ears. When the figure of Brian came into view, I could see that he was the same African American man that took my wife and kids to the safe house. I felt fear take over me with the realization that Brian's latest disguise and prosthetic face was of an African American man that claimed to be a cop to me just today. Brian knew that my wife and kids were meant to be taken to a safe house. But wherever they are now, Brian, the Phantom Killer, has them. And that's if they're still even alive. I was frozen in fear for a few seconds, knowing that the Phantom Killer had my wife and kids somewhere. But I knew that I couldn't mess this up now. I had to think fast what to do. I made the fast decision to lie low, knowing Brian's intelligence. He probably knows I'm watching. Fred approached Brian slowly and carefully and asked, "So, is this what you really look like, or is it just another one of your disguises?" Brian replied, "Nah, I just wanted to know what it's like to be a cop, so I decided to be a cop. It was very convenient when I took Mr. Sam Waters' wife and kids to a safe house." Fred held up his hands. "I'm not armed, and I'm not wired, so why don't we just get this podcast over with?" Brian looked suspiciously at Fred. Now, Freddy boy, what's the big rush? Don't you remember I said they were my rules? Fred was about to reply when Brian pulled out a gun and faced it right at him. Fred screamed, but didn't want to let Brian know there were cops watching, or he would definitely pull the trigger. Brian pulled the gun back and started laughing at Fred. Brian said in a mocking way, "Geez, Freddy boy, you sure are uptight. How am I meant to get you to interview me if I blow your head off?" I was watching this all unfold, knowing that I had to do something. I knew that Brian was one of the most intelligent killers in America, and he would have definitely thought it through, me running out to him right now, so I stayed behind the tree. Brian said, "Let's go into the warehouse, shall we?" Fred said, "Sure, but I need to get my mic and stuff out of the car." Brian gave him a suspicious look again and said, "Well, it looks like I better help you then." Fred got his recording equipment out of his car and they both walked into the warehouse. Sam knew he had to make a move now and also knew he had to get Brian alive, or he might never find out where his kids and wife are. He slowly went into the warehouse. Within a few seconds, there was a huge explosion. The whole building was rigged with C4 explosives, and it went up in a matter of seconds. The fire was dancing high in the air as the whole building was burning intensely. The cops all came out of their hiding places and knew that Sam, Brian and Fred were undoubtedly burned alive. The local sheriff said, "Son of a bitch, he wanted to kill himself and kill his biggest hunter." The cops had to stand back from the building and wait for the firefighters to arrive, knowing no one could have survived that explosion, let alone being in that fire. The smoke alone would kill anyone. Later that night, the local sheriff held a press conference. "Dear men and women and children of America, it is with my sadness and regret that one of the finest detectives I've ever worked with has sadly lost his life in a deadly fire, along with podcast personality Fred Jackson and serial killer Brian Wilson, otherwise known as the Phantom Killer. It is with regret that I can also inform you, just minutes before the killer killed himself in a rigged explosion to end his life and the others, he had confessed to taking the identity of a police officer and took Sam Waters' wife and children, which meant even though we had him in clear target to shoot, we couldn't afford to kill him, or we might never find out where he has Mr. Waters' wife and kids. We will work tirelessly to find out exactly where they are and keep you updated. The Phantom Killer might now be gone, but he made sure to get revenge in the biggest way by taking with him Sam, a detective that was so close to finally capturing him. R.I.P. to Sam and Fred. As Sam Waters was following Brian Wilson and the Phantom Killer into the warehouse, the explosion was deafening, and within seconds the whole building was engulfed in flames. Brian smiled as he fell through a trapdoor, safely sliding to safety down into an underground bunker he had spent months on end building. He knew it would withstand the blast. As he fell into the bunker, he quickly rolled out of the way as Fred Jackson came rolling out next. Fred was dazed while Brian had his eyes fixed to a chute in front of him where Sam Wilson dropped out of the chute within seconds. Brian laughed and said, "Hey, rough landing, but hey, it's better than being blown to smithereens by explosives. Hey, Sammy boy?" Sam was shaking in fear, but a part of him was relieved he wasn't killed in the explosion. Brian held the gun to them and said, "Okay, here is the part where you strip your clothes and shoes off completely. I need to make sure there's no tracking devices." It just struck Brian that everything he was saying would be heard if they were wearing a listening device. He kicked himself for that flaw in his otherwise ingenious plan. Both Sam and Fred stripped completely, and Brian walked over and handcuffed them both, and tied their legs to a bar so they couldn't escape, as he checked their clothes for any devices. He smiled when he discovered there were none. After a thorough search, he threw the clothes back to them and uncuffed them and told them they could get dressed. Up on the ground outside the burning building, the sheriff said to one of his officers, "Do you know what's funny about this whole thing? The officer replied, "What, sir?" "I am looking at that tracking device. Put in the shoe, and that thing is in one place. Not moving, but just in one place. But if that was in that fire, wouldn't the signal be lost?" The sheriff looked at the officer. "Are you following me, boy?" He replied, "Yes, sir. Do you think somehow they're still alive?" The sheriff said, "Let's hope so." It was like an oven with the heat in the bunker and the burning flames above them, but yet they were free from danger. Brian smiled at both men and said, "Well, do ye not give me credit for my ingenious plan? By the way, I suppose, Sam, you're wondering where your wife and kids are. Would you believe they're just across in the other room? But not to raise your hopes, they will not be able to survive much longer, as no one is going to know they're down here. I have enjoyed our friendship, Sammy boy. I must say, I kind of enjoyed the cat and mouse chase we were playing all over the years. But I'm afraid, my friend, there comes a time all good things come to an end, and this, my friend, is the end for you." Brian looked over at Fred and said, "And you, Freddy boy, you might wonder why you got involved in all this. Well, you see, you joined yourself, really, by accepting my interview. I was going to do a live podcast and then have you killed, but I said, this will be better. Everyone is going to think that I am gone, killed, gone from this god-forsaken world. But you see, the truth is, I will be walking out that tunnel I took months building, and I will be a free man, thankfully. I won't have to keep watching over my back all the time and being like a bloody special effects makeup artist." Sam shouted, "Let my wife and kids go, you sick bastard!" Brian pointed his gun at Sam's head and said, "No, you see, that wouldn't end well for me, would it?" Sam knew his end was coming, and suddenly there was a gunshot. Sam fell to the ground. Fred screamed, looking at Sam fall hard on the ground. He then saw Brian fall to the ground. Sam's eyes opened. He realized somehow he was alive, and his vision cleared. As he looked up, he could see the sheriff above him. The sheriff said, "Are you alright, son? Are ye guys okay?" Sam smiled and said, "I had seen better days." Then he lifted his finger and pointed towards the direction Brian told them he had his wife and kids held captive. The sheriff looked over at Fred. "Well, son, you sure will have a lot to talk about on your next podcast." Fred smiled and said, "What made ye guys guess we weren't killed in that explosion?" The sheriff pointed to Fred's shoe and said, "The answer is in your shoe." Fred thought, of course, the tracking device, and thanked God Brian didn't check his shoe better. A few days later, Sam Waters, his wife and kids were guests on Fred's podcast show, and the listenership ratings went through the roof, giving Fred's True Crime podcast the highest rating ever for his show. Tony was a writer of crime fiction and horror. He was writing his first draft, and he wanted peace and quiet, so he rented out a quiet cabin in the woods for 6 months. His story was based in a cabin in the woods, so he thought it only right that he wrote at least his first draft in the cabin. Things began to get very weird. He was just after finishing writing his first chapter, which was about a sheriff calling to ask about any teenagers who might have passed through, as they were terrorizing the neighbors. There was nothing that weird about him writing it at first. It was what happened afterwards really took Tony by surprise. Within 5 minutes of the chapter being written, there was a knock on the door and the sheriff was standing outside asking did Tony see any teenagers pass through as they were causing trouble down in the town. Tony was shocked and told him no, he didn't. He felt like telling him about what he had just wrote, but he just told him he was writing a novel and left it at that. The sheriff smiled at him and said, "That sounds really great, sir. Good luck with your novel. And remember, it's the start and the ending that's most important." He gave a smile and walked away. Tony felt a weird energy come off the sheriff as he walked away. The next couple of months didn't have any other weird coincidences, and Tony was starting his last chapter where a guy living in a cabin gets killed by a crazy killer. Tony had just finished the last line, which was, the killer had put a knife to the man's throat and slit it open. A few minutes later, Tony heard footsteps behind him. He got a start when he saw the sheriff standing right in front of him holding a knife, and he just stared at Tony, saying, "Remember I told you, it's the start and ending that's most important." Tony thought of the last line of his book and realised this sheriff knew what his first chapter was about, and he must have known what his last one was about, and he was about to kill him. Now his words about the beginning and ending made sense. As the man swung the knife for Tony, he ducked and grabbed the knife and stabbed the man who he had paid to give him 2 visits at the cabin. First visit to coincide exactly at the time Tony finished his first chapter, and the second visit coinciding with him finishing his last chapter. Tony smiled looking at the man in a pool of blood, wondering what the man had actually thought of him paying him $500 to call and do his first few lines, and then the grand finale a couple of months later with a knife. Tony wondered had the man any clue or any suspicion he would ever grab the knife off him and kill him with it. Tony was pleased with his work, always believing truth is always stranger than fiction. Hi, my name is Jake. I was looking for a roommate for the last 2 weeks, and finally I found one. I found it so hard to pay the rent on my own, so I was so thankful for the bill to be cut in half. I loved going to parties and having fun, and letting myself go every chance I could get. My roommate Simon prefers to stay in and work on his art. He goes to art college just like myself. He just sits all day painting. Sometimes I think he doesn't even eat. I was trying to get to sleep one night and he was over by his bed with his bed lamp on, painting and sobbing. I asked him what was wrong. He told me he had no idea what he could paint to get the marks he needed for an upcoming exam. I wasn't any good at giving advice, but I tried my best. I walked over to him and said, "Look man, don't get too upset over it. Just do what you do, put your blood, sweat and tears into it." He said to me then, "I hope they like it, whatever it is I do." Then he said something weird. He asked me, why was it that whenever artists died, their work was appreciated much more? I didn't know what to say, so I just told him I didn't know. The next day, I was going out to a party. It was Friday, and I asked him did he want to go. He said to me no, and told me he has a good idea to get his work noticed, and said he was taking my advice and putting his blood, sweat and tears into it. I smiled at him, wishing him good luck. At about 3 a.m, I came into my room, very quiet not to wake him. I put on my bedside light, and what I saw on the wall made me nearly collapse with fright. There was writing written in blood on the wall. It said, "Thanks for your advice." Simon was lying dead underneath what was a painting of what looked like a forest, but it was painted in his blood. The blood was still dripping from the canvas. I froze in fear, thinking back to me telling him to put his blood, sweat and tears into it, and remembered him asking why were artists' work appreciated more after they died. A couple of minutes later, I rang the police and explained to them, and I waited for them to come. I was home alone watching horror, and I felt tense as I hated being home alone. So the suspense of the movie added to my anxiety. I don't know why I'm such a crybaby. Maybe I should just not watch scary movies. I got a notification from my phone. It was a Snapchat notification. It was a message. It read, "Check my story." I wondered, who would it be from? As there was no photo on the profile, just black, I scrolled down my Snapchat contacts and viewed their story. I looked closer, squinting my eyes, as it was very dark. I could make out it was some sort of room. I jumped with fright when I realized it was my front door and the story was taken inside my hall. I looked up from the couch where I was sitting into the hall, but could not see anything. I realized the story wouldn't have been live, of course. Maybe it was my boyfriend Jake playing some stupid prank on me, but I still felt dread overcome me and was paralyzed with fear. Whoever this is could still be in my house. I got another notification and almost turned my phone off, but knew that wouldn't change anything if someone was actually in my house. I pressed the button and viewed the snap. This time it was a video. I could see the back of my head and my phone in my hand. Whoever was filming this snap was just behind me and is just behind me now. My heart jumped in my chest and I felt like screaming, but couldn't as I was frozen with fear. I suddenly felt a hand touch my shoulder and jumped and screamed. A man walked around with a mask, then took the mask off, and he stared right at me. Let me introduce myself. You can call me, Jake. You don't know me, as you were too busy stealing my phone the other day. I followed you home, and that's how I know where you live. I was going to call the police, but decided there would be something more creative I could do. I shouted, "Please, please, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't steal any phone." The man pulled out a phone. "Oh, but you see, you did. I have it all here on camera. Luckily, my good old observant friend caught the whole thing while pretending to be busy texting. He showed me the camera and I felt disgust watching my twin sister kissing my boyfriend. I looked up in fear, hoping he would believe me. That is not me. That is my twin.
I looked up in fear, hoping he would believe me. That is not me. That is my twin sister cheating with my goddamn boyfriend. Jake laughed. Do you expect me to believe that? I flicked through my phone and showed him a pic of me and my twin sister Sarah. He looked at it and then back to me. Well, where is your twin sister then? I was shaking with fear. She's at work. She will be home at 12. It was 11:30 now. I said, that bitch was kissing my boyfriend. I'll lead you right to her if you like. Jake smiled again and said, sounds like a plan. But work, wherever that is, well, that's not a place where I can exactly get revenge. I got out my phone and Jake looked at it to see was it his. I knew it wasn't. I'll call her to come straight home. Let me use my home phone. I have no credit. He nodded. Go on then. Call her now. I picked up the phone and after a few rings she answered. Please come back home straight after work. I'm in trouble with my project. I need some help. The deadline is tomorrow. It's an emergency. I hung up before any reply. He said to me, it looks like your twin sister is a thief and someone that stole her own twin sister's boyfriend. Wow, that's bad. This bitch will have what's coming to her. I smiled. You can say that again? If I knew about her being with my boyfriend, I would have tracked you down myself to you teach her a lesson. At 12:10, my sister pulled up in the driveway in a car and knocked on the door. I opened it and Jake was standing at the side. My sister walked in and a cop came in behind her. Once I saw the cop, I screamed, please help, help, he's in my house. I admitted to the cop afterwards. It was me that stole Jake's phone, but had to pretend it was my twin sister. I held the mute button down when I made the call to my sister. I spoke certain words, so instead of her hearing, I'm in trouble with my project, I need some help, the deadline is tomorrow, it's an emergency. She heard, I'm in trouble, I need help, it's an emergency. I was happy that it worked, pressing mute with certain words. So that is all she heard. And I will never ever steal anything again.
My name is Susie. I have been looking for a summer job for the last few weeks, and I finally found one. It was at a local clothes shop. I handed in my CV a week ago and got a call from the owner just when I finished school for the summer. Everything was looking up and I was really excited about starting my new job, which was at a local clothes shop. The owner, Martin, said he needed help around the shop, as his wife was visiting her family in New York. Luckily for me, she chose a good time to visit, as I got my summer job out of it. The job was okay, but nothing really fun-filled like I had hoped. Sometimes I thought I heard weird sounds. It was like weird banging or something. When I tried to figure out where it was coming from, it suddenly stopped. I put it down to rats or mice, but then again, it would be gross if they were around any shop. There was a big mirror in the middle of the shop, and I always felt weird passing it. I don't really know why, but things got a lot weirder when I realised the banging was coming from behind the mirror. I wondered, was there a room hidden behind it? And all sorts of crazy thoughts were running around my head. I often saw Martin, my boss, go into the storeroom, but he never left me near it. I couldn't open the door as I checked already and it was locked. I checked when he was out for lunch, so I thought to myself maybe I could have a chance if I had the key next time he goes out to lunch. The question was, how could I get to his wallet, because I knew that's where he kept the key, as I could always see him taking the key from his wallet. My curiosity was getting the better of me, so when he had his wallet on the inside of the counter, I quickly looked through it, and there was the key. I took it out just 5 minutes before he was going for lunch, and hoping he would not notice it gone. When Jack went out to lunch, I quickly opened the door and walked around the storeroom to where the mirror was. I was shocked to see a woman tied to a chair, gagged. I knew from a picture I had seen of his wife that it was his wife. I panicked, looking into her eyes that were filled with fear. I took the gag off her and asked her, was she okay? She said, "It's my husband. My husband. He's keeping me here as a hostage because I wanted to sell the store." I panicked with fear as Jack came back into the room holding a huge knife. Somewhere else a man was watching everything unfold online. Another man across the world was watching from his phone, while a man and woman were watching over in another part of the world. The wife smiled at her husband and kissed him. I was stunned. What is happening? Then he said to his wife, "You're always such a great actress. No wonder our viewers pay so much money to see me kill people." The wife said, "I must admit, I loved this one. You should have seen her face." I stood in shock, not knowing what was happening. I was shaking in fear, with Jack standing in front of me, wielding a knife, knowing now that it was all a setup and his wife had intentionally set the trap, using the sounds as a bait to get me to go into the room and investigate. I knew now that there were people who were paying to watch this couple kill people. I turned around, running for the door, and he ran after me, but luckily I was the best in my class at athletics and made it out the door and ran to safety. I will relax for the rest of the summer, as this experience frightened me from taking up a summer job for a very, very long time, as you can imagine. You know, getting a full 1 hour break at work should be easily given to all workers, but managers and owners seem to find ways around it. In every workplace I have been employed at, all my breaks have been disturbed, or even worse, I didn't get to have a full 1 hour break. Especially in times of economic downturn, it's always that guy at the bottom who gets the worst deal out of it all. We all must work more longer and have less breaks to create more profits for the owners. Only by the luck of the gods, which only happen ever so occasionally, will you get to have an undisturbed 1 hour break. A couple of months ago, I started applying for new jobs and got a new job straight away, which promised to give workers fair treatment. By fair treatment, they meant getting a full 1 hour break and giving you all the annual holidays that workers deserved, which was set up by the unions. When I spoke to the managers during my interview, they seemed nice and down to earth. All my past managers seemed bitter and grumpy, but these lot seemed to have a different outlook on things. The job role title was called a concierge for a residential building. The residential building was a brand spanking new one, and a lot of new building were being built to tackle the housing crisis. Anyhow, I fitted right into the job, and on my first day everything was going smoothly. On my first day, my manager told me that I don't decide when to go on my break, but my break times come to me. I honestly didn't know what my manager meant by this, but I was kind of busy to know more at the time. When I got inside the elevator to go up to the 9th floor, I couldn't believe it when the elevator had stopped working and was stuck on the 4th floor due to some mechanical issue. The company that built the elevators inside the residential building contacted me through the elevator. I was stuck inside and told me that a mechanic was on his way in an hour. Then my manager phoned me and he told me that he knew that the lift had broken down and knew that it would take the mechanic an hour to get here. My manager also told me that being stuck inside the elevator for an hour was my real break. Like my manager had told me before, that I don't get to decide when to have my break, but break times choose when to come to me, like being stuck inside an elevator. After the mechanic finally came and fixed the elevator, after an hour, I had a word with my manager. He thought nothing of it and didn't really care for what I had to say because I managed to have a full 1 hour uninterrupted break inside a broken lift. Then another time, I became stuck inside the stairs and the doors on the stairs aren't locked by a key but a fob system, so tenants need a fob card to get in and out of the stairs, just like how they need to get into the building. Basically, the fob card system had gone weird and all the doors which were connected to the system were all on lockdown. I had decided to use the stairs because I was scared of using an elevator after it had broken down, but now I was stuck inside the stairs and my fob card wouldn't work and let me out into the corridors of the building. My manager phoned me and told me that he knew the fob card system was down for an hour, and that hour being stuck inside the stairs was my official break. At that moment, I told myself that I was going to find another job because this was just crazy. I had never worked in a place where break times chose where and when a person gets to have a break. There was one time where I thought I wasn't going to get a break because nothing was breaking down or becoming faulty and trapping me inside a certain place in the building for an hour. For the first time in my life, I was happy and glad not to be getting a break. But when my shift was over and I got into my car, the car gate was down and wouldn't open for an hour. I was stuck inside the car park, which belonged to the building, and workers weren't allowed to park inside the car park, and my manager phoned me. He told me off for parking inside the car park, which only tenants could park in, and told me that it would take an hour for the mechanic to come and fix the car gate. That hour would be my break, even though my shift had finished and there was nothing else I could do but just wait it out. I couldn't find any new jobs because jobs were really drying up in my area. Now I had put in a month's holiday, which I needed, and it had been accepted. I decided that the whole of September would be my holiday, but on the last day of August, as I got into an elevator because I needed to get to the top floor, because something had happened on the 9th floor, the elevators stopped working again on the 5th floor, and I was trapped once again. An automatic call-out from the computer inside the elevator made to the company that built the elevators inside the building, but they had bad news, and they told me that they wouldn't have any available mechanic for a whole month. Then my manager phoned me and told me that the month spent inside the elevator was to be my holiday, because not only do your breaks choose where and when you get to have a break, but even your holidays choose where and when you spend your holiday. I am still stuck inside the elevator, and I am counting the days when this month will end. Also, a hatchet opens every 5 hours, and food is given to me, and I have no idea how that works. After I get out of here, probably smelling of body odor, I am not working here anymore. It all started when I visited a paranormal night where a paranormal expert was giving a demonstration on different types of paranormal activity, from ghost hunting to seances gone wrong to voodoo dolls. I introduced myself to the woman afterwards, praising her for hosting such a great night. She told me she was going to visit the Bridge of Lucifer she was talking about, and asked me did I want to go and check it out with her. She was telling me, like what she said earlier, there has to be 3 women, or else, if there were only 2, then the women would feel angry and very, very afraid. It would not happen if there was 1 or 3 or any more. It would only happen to 2 women together. The reason for it is because the bridge is meant to be possessed by the goat-headed boy. The woman told me that if I'd like to bring along a friend, then she will show me the bridge, and not to worry, as there will be 3 of us there. The background story was a boy was bullied years ago and fell by accident over the bridge. The boy was bullied by 2 girls, so anytime there are 2 girls on the bridge or 2 women, they feel angry because of the boy's spirit messing with them. A few days later, me and my friend and the lady were approaching the bridge. Before I stepped more onto it, I asked the lady, was she sure it was safe us walking onto the bridge? She said, of course, it's perfectly fine. There are 3 females on the bridge, not 2. If you were here without me, then yes, ye would feel the anger and fear. I suddenly felt strange. I had a weird feeling to attack the paranormal host, and looking at my friend, I knew she felt the same. Was this the anger if there was only 2 of us? I asked the host, does it affect men? The host said, no, it only affects 1 man. I asked, what do you mean? Then the woman pulled off a wig and said angrily, because I am the 1 man who is affected by my son's death, and I am the 1 man who will be able to summon his spirit by throwing ye off that bridge. With that, he was about to push us off when the man was blown back and a little boy appeared and said, stop, they're not the ones who killed me. Me and my friend got up on our 2 feet and ran as fast as we could, and when we felt safe, we rang the police. The man who was posing as the paranormal female host was arrested, and we heard later the story he told us was true, and after researching it online, I read lots of different stories that women felt angry and scared whenever there were 2 together. I was thankful the spirit of the little boy saved us, and felt sorry for his tormented soul stuck out there on that bridge that is called Bridge of Lucifer. It was rural Ireland, and Patrick was really looking forward to make his first Holy Communion. His friends were all talking in school about wearing a really cool black suit or brown suit, but he heard nobody speak about a white suit. He used to love watching the old gangster movies with his parents, and they all wore white suits and really cool patent black and white shoes. He was very poor and his parents couldn't even afford a suit, don't mind say a really cool white suit like the ones he used to watch in the old gangster movies. His mom knew a woman called Breda who used to make dresses, suits, cardigans, jumpers, etc. Patrick asked his mom to ask Breda how much would it be to make a white suit like the gangsters used to wear in the movies. Breda gave a price which he would be years saving up if he put away every single bit of pocket money he earned, and he knew that wouldn't work. 1. He had to buy food for school. 2. His communion would be long over by the time he saved enough money to get the suit made. Finally, when he was telling his dad's friend, he was given a chance to make his dream become a reality. Joe, his dad's friend, said to Patrick, "Well there, boy, you sure have your heart set on this white suit. What is it, nearly 2 months to your Holy Communion? Well, why don't you help me out in the factory? We make chairs, tables, and all sorts of really nice furniture." Patrick's face lit up and he said enthusiastically, "Gee, sir, that sounds a mighty swell idea." Joe said, "Well, ask your mom and dad, is it okay, and I can get you started in the next few days." Patrick's parents thought the idea was great and gave him the go-ahead, but made him promise to finish any schoolwork he had before he started his workday. Patrick finished school at 2:30, had his homework done by 4, and went out to work at 4:30 every day and finished at 7:30. He worked Monday to Friday and got around Joe to give him an extra day on Saturday where he worked from 9 to 1. After the first week, Patrick was exhausted. He learned how to use the saws and the cutting machine, etc. One day, while cutting a piece of wood for a table, he was feeling exhausted and his eyes closed for a few seconds. Everyone was startled and looked around. Patrick fell on top of the saw and there was blood pumping out of where his arm should have been. The saw cut his left arm completely off. The blood squirted on people as they came to help him. Patrick was sent to the nearest hospital and was depressed knowing he had his arm cut off on top of not having any money to buy his white suit. He was very withdrawn in school when he went back, but his friends were very supportive, apart from 2 bullies, Fred and Gary, who seemed to be evil. They used to bully him before his accident, and they didn't stop after. Since the accident, Patrick didn't feel right. Something was strange. He had a beautiful dream and wished it happened in real life. To his shock, a day later, his dream became a reality. The dream that became a reality was that word got out around the community about his accident, and it made the local and even national newspapers. Word got out, and Patrick was thrilled one day when a parcel arrived for him. His mom called him and told him. He opened it up and his face lit up when he saw that it was a really cool white suit, just like the one he wanted. The next day, 3 parcels arrived with white suits, the next 5, and by the end of the week, there were hundreds of white suits sent by people who heard about the story on the news. Patrick was thrilled, telling his friends at school about the suits and said there were so many they all had to be kept in their shed. Unfortunately, the 2 bullies, Fred and Gary, overheard him. They had planned to sneak into the shed tomorrow night, which would be Friday night, and throw red paint all over the suits and cut them to shreds. Patrick was really excited looking through all his white suits before going to school. It was sports day, so Patrick played different sports and had fun with his friends. Fred and Gary were unusually quiet. That night, Fred and Gary were putting their plan into action, and they both planned to have a sleepover and snuck out of their house and went to the shed in Patrick's garden. They were delighted to see it wasn't even locked. Fred whispered, "See, I told you, Who'd want to lock a garden shed? They both opened the door, slow, ready to throw the red paint all over the suits and cut them to shreds. As the door opened, they both screamed as there was a huge bang of his dad's bear trap, trapping the boys' legs. They screamed in pain as they both had their legs caught in the bear trap his dad brought over years ago from his hunting days in America. Patrick walked into view wearing a white suit, feeling like the gangsters in the old gangster movies. He held up his dad's shotgun and pointed at them and said, "Now I really feel like a gangster in those old gangster movies." The boys were screaming in pain, and Patrick smiled, thankful of his new quality. Since having the accident, he dreams of his future, which gave him the psychic visions of the two boys breaking in, ruining his suits. The boys tried, but couldn't figure out how he knew what they had planned. Patrick and his parents could not understand that when he woke up the morning after the accident, his arm was right there where it was ripped off the day before during the accident. He wore a cast in school for the next couple of weeks to avoid having to explain what they can't even explain.
Hi, this is a story I have from when I was a boy about 10. I remember my mom used to tell me all cool stories about a ballroom called the Shiny Ballroom. It sounded like a really cool place. She told me back then all the girls were at one side and all the boys were at the other side. And when the slow dances came on, the boys would walk or sometimes slide across the floor to ask the girl who they would like to dance with out to dance. The ballroom used to also have all the biggest show bands and singers of the time. This would have been around the 60s and 70s, in the height of the rock and roll and show band era. There was a crystal ball in the middle of the room. I'd love to have known what would it have been like to grow up in the rock and roll era. When I was 10, the ballroom was shut down for years, and it was abandoned as long back as I can remember. It actually was not even open when I was born, I'd say. I remember seeing teenagers go around the back of the hall, so I realized that there must have been an entrance into the building. One day, me and my mom were passing it, coming back from shopping, and we decided to take a look at the back of the building. We saw a window smashed, and it was an entrance into the building. Me and Mom decided to climb up into the opening to see what the building was like now. We climbed through the space and noticed an eerie, lonesome atmosphere. I remember thinking of all the dances and people who met each other and happy times, and now it's just this dark and creepy abandoned building. We walked through an entrance where the steps were down to the dance floor. My mom was telling me where the people used to dance, and she showed me where the crystal ball used to hang from the ceiling. It was now just an old piece of cable hanging from the ceiling. I tried to imagine how this place once looked. It must have been such an incredible, lively dance hall back in its day. We walked through the dance floor, and there was a drawing of a couple dancing on the wall. My mom showed me where the boys used to sit and the girls. I realized how different things are today. We walked to the hall, and at the back of it there was a side room. I noticed something very creepy on the wall. Even though I was 10, I was a fan of heavy metal, so I knew what a pentagram was, or some people might call it the Devil's Star. I told Mom to look, and I shone the light in the wall. There was a pentagram written in red with 666 below it, and a satanic verse saying, "Death will rest here" at the end of it. Me and Mom found it very creepy, and I felt uneasy being in the room. I had a fear of anything to do with Satanism or the devil, and back then it was the satanic pandemic. Loads of stories were breaking on the news about different things linked to Satanism, and I was only a kid, so it freaked me out totally. I often think I would have loved to have taken a photo of that verse on the wall. You might wonder why, but it will make sense in the end of this story. It was a creepy experience, but years later was when it got a whole lot creepier. When news broke they were going to build a funeral home on the exact ground of the dance hall, exactly where the verse was written that said, "Death will rest here." The funeral home now has been built for years, and the coffins lie exactly in the same spot as the verse was written. That's why I would have loved to have taken a photo to see exactly the words, "Death will rest here." Of all the places they could have built a funeral home, I felt it so weird and creepy. They built one on the exact same place. There was a satanic verse written on a wall saying, "Death will rest here."
Me and my friends were camping for the weekend, and we were really excited, as we had planned it for weeks. There were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls, 2 couples. We were deep in the woods when we decided to set up our tent. Each couple had their own tent. It was a moonlit night, so the brightness that was there was coming through the trees, even though it was still very dark, as the trees blocked out most of the moonlight, which added to the creepiness of the whole atmosphere deep in the woods. We lit a fire in the middle of the space we set up the tent. It was hard work gathering the wood, harder than I expected. I never expected it to be so hard building a fire in the woods. In the movies, it's almost like the fire is already there. After the fire was lit, we started drinking some beer and told ghost stories. Suddenly, when it was my time to tell my story, I heard some noise over by the trees. I feared it was a bear or even some crazy stalker. My friend walked over to investigate, and he suddenly jumped and screamed, then started laughing and said, "Oh my god, guys, ye are so over-dramatic." Then suddenly something caught his eye. He was bending down to look at something in the grass and picked it up. He seemed to be holding a piece of wood, and whatever was on it was making him act very strange. We all asked him, what was it? When he walked over, he showed us and said, "That's weird, right?" It was a piece of wood with "Find Me" written in red. I felt fear overcome me, wondering, could it even be blood? My friend said, "What the hell is this about?" I said, "It looks pretty weird. I mean, find who?" My other friend was laughing, saying, "Maybe it's the boogeyman. Woo!" His girlfriend started laughing until there was another noise from over the other side of the clearing. My friend walked over and yet again saw another piece of wood with writing on it. He brought it over to show us. "I'm down this direction. Keep going." We all said together, "No way are we going down there." I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep, but it was too late to trek back out of the woods at this time of night, so we just decided to call it a night and be happy to get out of here in the morning. When we were just about to rest our heads and get some sleep, I noticed there was a shadow of a hand outside my tent. I froze in fear, anticipating what it could be outside, and told my boyfriend. He reluctantly opened the zip of the tent, and there, outside of the tent, was a little boy drenched from head to toe in water. He was about 10 years old, and he was crying, saying, Why didn't anyone find me?" Suddenly, he seemed to disappear into thin air. We had the pieces of wood with the writing gathered outside, so we decided to keep them to tell the police the next day. When we did, the sheriff looked at us strange. "Ye damn kids, playing these sick games. Why can't ye let that poor boy rest?" That night, we learned that 10 years ago, on that very night, in the direction the piece of wood was telling us to go, a 10-year-old boy drowned while running from his parents to hide while they were playing hide and seek. I was walking home one night, and while I was walking along, I noticed some type of pop-up shop, place that I've never seen before. It had written on a sign, "Come in and take the free test and find out the real you and find yourself." I always used to hear my friends talking about different ways of finding themselves. Some used yoga meditation, others just liked to take long walks in the countryside. I could definitely do with being in tune with myself more, so I decided to walk in and see what it was all about. And if it is free, there's no hidden costs. Well, what harm can it do? There was a man dressed like a doctor, and he greeted me with a big smile and said, "Welcome, sir. You have come to the right place if you are looking to find yourself." We exchanged pleasantries, and then he started the test. The thing was, he had covered my eyes with some kind of pair of goggles, and I could see weird shapes and colours, etc. And before I knew it, the test seemed to be over. I asked him, "Is that it? Do I need to answer any questions or anything?" He replied, "No, the test is done, and I hope you will be able to get in touch with yourself very soon and find yourself." I found it weird how he kept mentioning the term "find myself," but I thanked him and walked out of his place. As I was walking down the road, I noticed someone wearing the same jacket as me. I put that down to just some person having the same jacket as me. But things got very weird when the next two people I passed were wearing the same jacket. I couldn't understand how so many people could wear the same jacket as me. Then what I saw, I almost fainted with fear and shock and astonishment. Right in front of me, there were two people talking, but those two people were me. I froze on the spot, with my eyes fixed on two people who looked exactly like me. I thought back to what the man kept saying. He hoped I'd find myself. There were a group of people walking past me, and once again, they were all me. I ran back to where the man was, but when I got there, he had gone and there was no pop-up shop. I have explained to people how it had happened and how can they be me, but they say that I must be suffering from some delusion. They have now put me in an asylum, but I know I am not crazy. I know that whatever that guy did to me during the test has messed with me big time. I can't look at anybody without looking at myself. Things took a huge turn when I happened to look into a door and saw a doctor standing over a person wearing the exact same goggles I had worn for the test. I knew I wasn't crazy, and this is proof that something sinister is going on. Suddenly some guards caught me looking and handcuffed me. I hope and pray that whatever they have done to me will go away soon and I can get out of this hellhole, which no doubt is a base for whatever operation they are performing on people. And I wish I never, ever did that damn test. My name is Simon. I have a story to tell you about my experience when visiting a vintage store. I was always curious about items that could be picked up at those type of stores and about the history behind them. But one particular day, something really took my interest in a huge way. It didn't look anything special, just an old-style telephone, which I'm sure many houses still had the original style, or many had retro-style phones designed in the same style. But it wasn't the look that sparked my interest in this phone, it was what the man behind the counter told me. He said to me, "Hey there, I see you looking at that telephone. Let me tell you a little story behind it. You might have often heard of the Amityville Horror or Poltergeist movies. Well, this phone is from a haunted house just like that. This phone was handed in just over a week ago. Apparently, the owner said they were using it as their home phone, but say it's possessed by some demon. They didn't go into detail, but told me I could burn it or throw it away if I liked. I still don't know why they didn't burn it themselves, but anyway, I knew with a story like that behind it, and if people knew about the haunting, some of these paranormal ghost hunter folk would pay top dollar for it. I have newspaper clippings about the house. I cut the man off, afraid he would keep me an hour talking about it. How much is the phone, sir? The man rubbed his chin and said, let's say $100. How about that? $100? Wow, that's a lot. The man said, like I said, there's a lot of paranormal folk out there that would pay top dollar for it. I was working all summer and had a few $100s saved, and the phone really stood out to me. Plus, I was really intrigued with those type of paranormal stories, and I guessed I couldn't get better than this, so handed him over $100. He smiled and said, "Thanks, young man, and remember, be careful with this thing. The owners don't want nothing to do with it because of all sorts of evil demons they say harness energy through it." I smiled and thanked the man, knowing what he said sounded cool to me, not something that would scare me. A few days later, I had it hooked up to my room instead of my old telephone that used to be there. I told a few of my friends in school, and they all told me I was crazy to spend money on a silly phone that was meant to be possessed. Nothing out of the ordinary happened until one night I was home alone. The phone rang and someone spoke. "Hello, I have a telegram for you. I am just wondering, do I have the right address?" I knew telegrams weren't around for years, but I remember my grandparents talking about them. I didn't pay much attention, but they said my name, so I just said yes. Also, I wondered why anyone was delivering a message to the house at night. I didn't pay much attention to it until 10 minutes later there was a knock on the door, and the boy dressed in old-style clothes like something out of the 19th century handed me a box. I took it, wondering what it was. Before I could open it, the phone rang again. This time it was different. It was like there were wires crossed, and I was listening in on a conversation. I could hear two people speaking to each other, and no matter how loud I said hello, they didn't hear me. I listened to hear what they were saying. One man said, "It's all sorted. The delivery was made to his house. We know it is Simon's house." And better again, he answered the door. My heart nearly jumped into my throat when I heard what they said next. "I will be going to his house right now to kill him as ordered." I threw the phone from my hand, not knowing what to do. I was just about to call the police when there was a knock on the door. I jumped with panic. Maybe it isn't them, I hoped. I slowly walked downstairs to peep out the door to see who was standing outside. It was a person wearing a ski mask. I ran upstairs to grab my father's gun to protect myself as the door opened. How did they know where the hiding spot outside for the spare key was? The person walked into the hall, holding the gun right at me. And I panicked and held up my dad's gun and shot the person dead before they shot me. Then after the gunshot, I didn't understand what had happened. My friends walked in and saw the blood and the person I had shot. One of them checked his pulse, shouting, "Oh my God, he's dead." I shouted, "What is this? What's going on?" It turned out my friends were just playing a prank on me over that stupid phone I was telling them about. I am now writing this letter from inside a prison cell where I am serving time waiting for a verdict in the court trial where I am pleading self-defense. I keep asking myself, did the phone have the power to make my friends play that stupid prank? Or was it their own idea? It was a beautiful summer's day, and I was walking along the countryside to unwind from a hard week's work. I was never down this road, and the reason is because I took a break from work for a week in as backward a place as I could get in the middle of Texas. This was my first day here, and I must admit the scenery is beautiful. I came across a farm, and suddenly, breaking the peaceful tranquility of the countryside atmosphere, I heard a screech. I wondered, what could it have been? So I investigated. I walked behind the barn and could see, way down a hill, a man with a huge knife and it looked like he was about to cut the other man's head off. I felt goosebumps crawl all over my body, and I just froze, afraid I'd let them know I was here, and he would definitely kill me also for witnessing it. I hid behind the barn, then took another peek down the hill to see were they still there. Then I ran as fast as I could. About an hour later, I found a local police station and explained it to the sheriff. He said he would drive out there right away, and he took my number and he said he would keep me updated. The weird thing was, the sheriff told me he went down to the place I mentioned, but there was no barn and no farm, but just overgrown fields. I couldn't understand what was happening and pleaded with him to drive me down to where I saw it. I was dumbfounded when we got there, as it was just how the sheriff said. There was no barn, but just overgrown fields. The sheriff asked me, was I on something or had I the wrong place? But I knew I hadn't the wrong place. The question was, how and why was it so different? I went back to my motel a few hours later and lied on my bed pondering what was wrong. I tried to come up with some explanation but failed miserably. I got up and switched on the TV, and suddenly numbers popped up on the screen. 120-618-19. I wondered what they popped up for and had a strange feeling to write them down. I tried to get some sleep then, but was woken by a sound outside the motel. There was an envelope down on the ground. I picked it up, wondering what it was. Wondering was it for me? There was a receipt for a knife. I thought it very strange and wondered, was someone playing some kind of sick trick on me? But then my eyes caught something very, very strange. On the paper, I saw the receipt's order number. Looked very familiar. So I took out the piece of paper I had wrote the numbers on that were written on the TV. Sure enough, the numbers matched the receipt's order number, which was 120-618-19. I then thought, maybe the motel had their own way of putting an order number on the TV. But I hadn't ordered anything. My curiosity was growing, and suddenly I had an idea. What if I searched those numbers online? I got out my laptop and searched them, and my jaw dropped and my heart thumped in my chest when I saw what I saw. On the 12th of the 6th, in 1819, there was an execution taking place on this exact date. Today was the 12th of the 6th, 2019, exactly 200 years after that date. I suddenly realised the significance of the numbers. I looked at the photo and saw the two men that I just saw earlier. I felt shivers run up my spine as I tried to fathom, how did I become a witness to an execution that happened 200 years ago? Unless for the unbelievable idea that I must have somehow travelled through a time warp to travel back 200 years to witness it. I couldn't understand what was happening. I jumped when suddenly I heard a knock on the door. I answered it, and what I saw, I would never, ever forget. It was the man who was killing the other man in the field, standing right before me. He raised his knife and was about to kill me when suddenly he disappeared. I told a few people, but they wouldn't believe me. I am very afraid that someday the man will come back to kill me, maybe because I witnessed the execution 200 years ago. But as I said, no one would believe me, but the fear is rooted deep in me, and I regret ever coming to this God-forsaken town.
Sarah was feeling very uptight. She hated the rain. It made her feel anxious and full of dread. She even hated the shower, as it reminded her of rain. The feeling of water on her skin might as well have just been sharp glass pouring onto her skin, cutting her. The pain felt the same. Jason was walking down a creepy, dark, lonesome road where the trees were so high and overlapping across the road it was even dark looking in the day. But it wasn't the darkness unsettled him. It was the feeling of the rain dripping off his hair onto his shoulders made him shiver in fear. He ran down the road to get home faster and in out of the rain. Lisa pulled up in her driveway and stepped out of her car. She dreaded making the short few steps in the rain. She knew most people, of course, wouldn't be afraid of getting wet, but every time it rained, she felt petrified. Jack was going for his jog when it suddenly started to rain heavy. He was 10 minutes from his house, so he began to sprint home. He had a huge irrational fear of the rain. He was panting and out of breath by the time he got home, and was relieved once he had his house door shut behind him and he was in from the rain. Mike was finished football practice and startled the other players when he freaked out on the football field. Once a heavy rain shower began, he just lost it. His friends looked, laughing, and one of the boys said, "It's only rain, it's not going to kill you." It was a rainy night, and it was the high school reunion, and everyone was enjoying themselves, except 5 people who were reluctant to even come along at all. Those 5 people were Sarah, Jason, Lisa, Jack, and Mike. They all were called into a room that had a barrel with water in it. Mike stood in the middle, and Martin, the school bully, was sitting on a chair tied to it with a cloth wrapped around his mouth. When everyone was in the room, Mike walked over and locked the door, then turned back to Martin and said, "Do you remember all the times you used to drop us into a barrel of water in the back of the school and at house parties? Where did you even get the water to put in the barrel to torture us? Do you realize the embarrassment and humiliation you put us through?" Mike pulled the cloth from Martin's mouth and he started pleading. "For God's sake, we were just kids. I'm sorry, okay?" Mike and Jack dragged him and held him over the barrel water and lowered him into it. The others looked on in horror, shouting to them pull him out, and that was enough. When Mike and Jack finally pulled him out of the water, they noticed he wasn't breathing. He had drowned to death within the first few seconds in the water. They have never spoken about what had happened on the night of the reunion to anyone outside of that room, and no one suspected them as the body was discovered in the pool the next day, and the police had it down as an accidental drowning. Mike was the one who hid the body and dumped it in the pool when he got a chance. Sarah, Jason, Lisa, Jack and Mike all took steps towards finding out how to deal with their irrational fear of rain. They didn't realize they all shared the same fear. The doctors and psychiatrists assigned to each person had no clear idea of why they had the fear, and it was made harder for them to not know what had happened to them when they didn't even know what happened during school and during that unforgettable night at the high school reunion. After all, how would anyone know why they had a fear of rain when they did not know what had happened to them and what had happened to me? After all, who would be able to put everything together that I am haunting my killers each and every time it rains?
Friday night 2016. I was 8 at the time, when my brother, who was 10, and I were home alone. We stayed in our bedroom to play on our PS2. My brother went downstairs to make some meals for us to eat, while I was waiting. I needed to go to the bathroom so badly, so I went. Once I came back to play on my PS2, I saw my brother looking confused. I asked him, "What's wrong?" He replied, "Did you open the window?" I thought he was joking, so I laughed and said, "No, are you trying to scare me?" Then he didn't answer. I didn't mind, he sometimes ignores me. I went back to play on my PS2 when I heard a loud banging on the window. I couldn't see who it was, since it was dark outside. I went outside with my brother and a flashlight. When we saw who it was a big tall white man with really blonde hair and a black hoodie. I quickly ran into the house, went to my kitchen to grab a knife, and ran with my brother to the bathroom. While I was in the bathroom, I realized I left the door open. I cried in fear with my brother. We called 911. Then, when the cops arrived, they found the man dead. Days passed and I wondered if he wanted us to see him kill himself or worse. I love shopping. You might love shopping also. But what would you do if your shopping experience turned into a nightmare? I have a true story that was just that. It happened in a town in California called Oxnard. The town has a population of just over 200,000 people, and even though this town is the home of this horror story, it was ironically voted one of the safest cities in the United States of America back in 2013. The crime level is low and the income level is high. To add to that, it is a beautiful looking town. But no matter what town you go to, there are always places you'd want to watch out. There are good and bad people everywhere, I suppose. Back to what I told you at the start of this story, shopping. This particular shopping experience I am about to tell you about is far from your typical enjoyable experience. This is an account of a shopper at a huge mall, which is the mecca of American consumerism. The place to everyone go to get basically anything they desire, whether it be a book, clothes, food, or a toy. Toys will feature heavy in this story. Bear in mind, this particular store is meant to be haunted, but also bear in mind that not every store is haunted, of course. The ghost that people talk about in this store is of a little girl of Mexican-American descent. She is said to like to play in the toy aisle. There is nothing strange about that. What kid doesn't? But what is strange is she is a ghost. Employees and patrons have seen her roam around in the girls' toys section, but sometimes she can be seen playing with the trucks as well. She doesn't come across as sinister or dangerous to people who spot her. She is meant to usually greet them with a ghoulish smile. Why people say ghoulish is because her eyes are milk white, but her entire body is covered in blood. One customer said the first time they saw her, they just about died and went up to Jesus. They thought it was some kid who had hurt themselves. When the person saw the girl disappear in front of her very eyes, she knew she was a ghost. But the girl never talks. Some people believe that the girl was murdered years and years ago in the field where the huge mall now stands. That is a rumour which was made in the circle of people that came across the girl. Whether it is true or not, they don't know. The people who see the girl are often greeted by her smile. One person who has seen the girl said it stands to reason that if she has been haunting that area for all these years, forever trapped in the spirit and mentality of a little girl, she would find the sudden appearance of a bunch of toys around her to be a golden opportunity. As horrific as this story is, no one has exactly any cause to fear the ghost. The main reason for people being so disturbed is the sheer volume of blood on her is enough to freak people out. A former employee has said, "We just let her be mostly. She doesn't hurt anyone, at least so far, and there's really not much we could do about her if we wanted to." It's sad, you know, that little girl playing all alone in there in the toys with no friends or family to be with her. So yeah, we just let her be, and we hope that she never decides that she doesn't like us anymore.
Good evening. Tonight I'm your host, Mr. Ramsey, and I'll be collaborating alongside the Assassin Rapper to present you this scary, uber animated horror story. If you enjoy this collaboration, then please let us know by dropping a like and letting us know down in the comments. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. This happened about 6 months ago, and I recently took an Uber for the first time since this incident, so I thought I'd share. I was leaving a work function at a bar around midnight in a large city, about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build. Not tall, not strong, definitely not threatening in any way, and I was a bit buzzed that night. I'm talking like 3 drinks, so not incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I'd ordinarily take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I just decided to Uber. The company reimburses me for the bill anyway, so it was no difference to me. Once the Uber pulls up, I say goodbye to my colleagues and get in the back seat. I'm always very nice to my Uber drivers, so I introduce myself. This driver, let's call him Ed, since I don't actually know his real name, seemed totally normal. No red flags, and we make pleasant conversation for about 15 minutes until we are squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From the pleasant conversation, I learned he lives in a certain neighbourhood not far from my home. Note that his neighbourhood was relatively nearby. We'd be completely out of the way en route we are taking to my home. The conversation reaches its natural end, so I just stay a bit quiet and start looking at my phone, Reddit, whatever. The quiet is interrupted by his voice, suggesting I take a nap if I feel tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. I replied that I wasn't drunk and, like I had said, I just had a few drinks, so no need to nap. Haha. "I'll be home soon enough anyway." He dropped it after that, but I still thought it was weird he'd say that. About 5 minutes later, he says that the highway had some weird construction going on, and that the single lane traffic ahead would make my trip way longer than it needed to be. He asks if it's okay to take another route. I oblige, already on edge and just wanting to be at home. My partner calls at that moment, asking when I'll be home, and I make sure to make it very clear I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone is expecting me at a specific time and knows where I am. After I hung up the phone, the Uber driver stays quiet and we get off the highway, on a different exit than I'd ever used, but I guess that'd be expected on a different route home. I'm bullshitting on my phone because I don't want to talk to this guy anymore, not even looking up until he says, "My house is only 5 minutes from here, okay?" Pit in my stomach, I'm probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now, a distance enlarged, I'd later learn artificially, by his shortcut. I say some nonsense about how I like the neighbourhood, and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here instead, blah blah, basically anything I can think of to make it seem like I don't think this is weird and I'm not picking up on any signals. Surprisingly, he doesn't say anything in response, and now starts driving on a road in a direction I knew led to my house. Phew, crisis averted, right? Except, not exactly. 15 minutes to go and my surroundings are more familiar. Just as I'm starting to feel more at ease, he starts asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asks if my boyfriend makes me happy. He does, very much, so I gush a bit and say yes, he makes me very happy. Then he asks if I make him happy. I thought that was weird, but humour is my defence mechanism, so I say, well, I should hope so. 8 minutes away. He turns onto a side street and pulls over onto the side of the road, looks back at me over his headrest, and asked if I'd make him happy too. I said, what? Mostly because I can't even believe what's happening. He asks me again, do you want me to make you happy tonight? I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel. The street is dark and I don't see any lights on at nearby houses. Close to 1 AM at this point on, and at a weekend, and I don't know what the hell this guy has in the car. I default to the response many women know to be the true barrier to men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird grin falls away from his face and he says, he doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start. I tell him my boyfriend is expecting me home any minute, and besides I love him and don't want to hurt him. Can you please just take me home? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it worked, and he didn't say another word after that, just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I say thanks as I get out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess. And that was that. I got into my house and start crying immediately, for some reason as soon as I hug my partner. He tells me I need to contact Uber immediately and tell them what happened so that the guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agree and pull up the app to file the complaint. Except when I look at my last ride, the picture on my profile was 100% not the same guy who drove me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo was brown and wore a turban, maybe early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just a bit older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing actually happened. I was worried for a while since the guy knew where I lived, but apparently it's long forgotten since I just took an Uber today. Moral of the story: always make sure the photo in your Uber driver's profile matches the person who's driving the car. Thank you all for listening. I want to thank the Assassin Rapper for his fantastic animation work, and I hope you all enjoyed. Remember to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you don't miss any future collaborations.
My friend and I always used to walk through a wonderful spacious park when we were younger. It was full of tall trees and it was very nicely maintained. In this large park there was an abandoned mansion. I can't really say how long it had been there, but on that day the front door of the mansion was wide open. The two of us decided to check out what was inside the place. As we inched through the door, the very first thing we noticed was that the mansion's floor was littered with crumpled up pieces of paper. We looked at each other and observed that there was no furniture, nothing except for those wrinkled balls of paper. The mansion had 6 rooms on its main floor, and every room we entered bore more and more scrunched up pieces of paper. We decided to open up one of the paper balls to see what was inside. Our curiosity got the better of us. I picked up a single wrinkled piece, and as my friend picked up another, I unfolded my paper, smoothing out its bends and dents. At that moment, it was almost as if a piece of a rainbow emerged before our eyes, and I was suddenly standing next to a large window in one of the upstairs rooms of the house. I was looking outside into the large park when I looked down at the piece of paper I held. It read, "Look outside the large window that oversees the park in the upstairs parlour." I dropped the piece of paper and it fluttered gracefully to the ground. Meanwhile, I stared at my open hands in a bout of horror. Dazed and utterly perplexed, I found my way downstairs and met up with my friend. He was in the kitchen, sitting at a round table that hadn't been there before. Where did that come from? I wondered. My friend stared at his opened paper and reread the words several times before he looked at me and turned the page my way. It said, "Go to the kitchen and sit at the round table." We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. Within seconds, we were laughing our heads off, marvelling at our newfound game. We could hardly believe what had happened, but being young as we were, the mystery was endlessly exciting. We decided again to open up another scrunched piece of paper. As we opened up the crumpled papers on the floor, we experienced the same sudden flash of rainbow colours. But this time I ended lying down in the field behind the mansion. When I peered onto the paper in my right hand, it read, "Lie down in the field behind the mansion." I giggled uncontrollably. After a few minutes, of running around the house, I found my friend collecting multiple balls of paper in his arms, eager to experience more of these strange, exciting phenomena. We both got the gist of what was happening at this point. We had no idea as to how it was possible, but we decided to have more fun with it. The supernatural always had a way of captivating our hearts. After a few more run-throughs with these strange mini teleportation devices, I began to feel apprehensive. I wondered if at one point I would be placed somewhere I didn't want to be, or I'd be made to do something that I didn't enjoy. We continued though. Minute after minute we unfolded many papers and travelled through bedrooms, closets, trees. But then, after having been on the roof of the mansion, I stood before my friend, dead on the living room floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't murder him. I read on my crumpled page as I felt a surge of vomit and bile rising into my throat. Nothing came out, but the sickness in my throat spread to my stomach, my head, and my heart. I didn't know what to do at this point. I began to scream and shout, praying to God for this to be a nightmare. I wanted it to go away. I wanted to rewind our day and be outside again, together walking underneath the trees. I willed myself to be calm, and I hesitantly unfolded another paper in the hopes that the problem would correct itself. Once again, I saw the colours of the rainbow, and I found myself standing behind a tree several meters away from the house. I could clearly see the front door within a few instants. I saw both myself and my friend walk through that door. I began to wonder if I had died or if I was having an out-of-body experience. I looked at the sheet in my hand, and the only words scrawled upon it were, "Time will repeat itself, and a paradox will take place, and it will be allowed." That gave me an idea. In my pocket remained the paper that made me kill my friend. Without looking at it, I crumpled it back up. Quietly, I followed my other self, who had separated from my friend, as he explored the rooms of the house. As I crept behind him, he turned around very suddenly. Before he could utter a syllable, I forced the paper in front of my eyes, and in a flash of rainbow colours, I was able to kill my other self. The laws of time allowed me to take over my dead self's place in this world, and also because of the fact that it was allowed to happen. As it was written on the second piece of paper that I had on me, which reversed time. It must have control over time and paradoxes, which made me now the new alive and present of my other dead self. I hid my limp, bleeding other dead self in a cupboard in the upstairs bathroom to rot. To my great relief, I heard my friend call my name from downstairs. My friend who managed to stay alive and well, my best friend. When I went downstairs, he greeted me excitedly, smiling childishly, and being blissfully unaware of the situation. I pretended that nothing had happened. In a heartbeat, I told him that the house creeped me out and that it would be much better if we left. After that day, we never went near the mansion again. I don't know if anyone saw or heard about anything that happened between us, but I recently heard from another friend that the house had been demolished. I dreaded the probable prospect that my corpse was uncovered in the bathroom cabinet. Julie and Jake were having a difficult time in their marriage. They decided to take a train journey across America. What Julie hadn't known was Jake, her husband, only organised the journey to organise a hitman to kill her on the train. Julie was sitting down reading a book, while Jake said he was going to get a drink in the train's bar. As Julie was reading, a man sat down next to her, introducing himself as Andy, and asked her for the time. Julie found it strange, knowing these days anyone should have the time when they have a phone. The man introduced himself to Julie. This was all part of Jake's plan. 15 minutes later, Jake had arrived, and as planned, he told her an old friend of hers was in the next carriage. He recognised me and was asking for her. Of course, there was no school friend. The plan was that the hitman pushed Julie out of the train door when she went to see what friend. Jake hoped she'd take the bait and smiled when she did. Julie walked towards the door. Jake would have loved to have watched it happen, but knew it would be too obvious. The hitman was wearing gloves and an aesthetic face, just in case there were cameras they missed scoping the train out a few days ago. Jake had planned to walk up to the next carriage in about 15 minutes to get clarification the job was done. He was about to walk into the next carriage when the man said, "Hi sir, nice journey, isn't it?" Jake smiled, knowing those were the exact words he was meant to say. Jake replied, "Is the job done?" The man said, "Well, I got to chat a lot with your wife. She seems a very nice lady," but most importantly, he was looking behind Jake's shoulder at this moment. Jake turned around to see what he was looking at, and with his shock, he saw Julie staring at him with hatred in her eyes. The man continued to speak. "More importantly, your wife. She seems to be a very sweet lady, and may I say, a very beautiful lady." Jake was dumbfounded and said in a confused tone, "What's going on here?" Julie spoke. "Let me explain. And this hitman here who goes by the name of Andy, which I call Andrew, is not just a regular hitman. We have been dating for the last 6 months. Wait, should I change that to we have been having an affair for the last 6 months?" And she gave a sinister smile. Jake didn't know what was happening. He spoke quietly so no other passengers could hear him. "What is happening here? How do ye know each other?" Andrew explained. "When you first made contact with me, did you not realize it was me who first made contact with you?" Jake still couldn't understand how a hitman he hired on the dark web could have been having an affair with his wife he ordered to kill before he even made contact. Jake said, "Wait a minute. You said you made contact with me first." Suddenly Andrew said, "Well, we told a tiny lie, but it's not about me making contact first." With that, Andrew pulled off his prosthetic mask, revealing the face of their marriage counsellor they had for the last 6 months. It was Andrew and Julie were having an affair, and because of Julie not trusting her husband, she checked his phone one time when he left it on the bed for 5 minutes while he shaved. Just as he left, she picked it up in order to not have to put in any code that she knew she wouldn't be able to guess. He'd just been on it, so she didn't have to put in any access code. She went through it and came across a text that said all the information and money needs to be transferred to this email address. I will have the job done once the money is sent through Bitcoin to this account. Julie had no idea what it was, but sent an email saying, "I will send the money, but I need to know exactly what you're going to do. I need to know exactly every detail of what I'm paying for." Julie changed the real email, so no matter what email Jake sent would not get sent and would not be received by the hitman. But she changed it by adding a dot that was barely seen. But Julie kept contact and brought the hit forward, of course, with the real hitman thinking he was in contact with Jake. Julie had been on the train waiting for the hitman to arrive, and when he did, there were undercover police ready to arrest him as soon as he asked for the time. They waited until a guy with a prosthetic face of Jake clarified with the hitman did he finish the job. Then the undercover police moved in. The real Jake was shocked to learn that the hitman was arrested a week ago, and he was going to be arrested now. Julie looked at him and said, "You son of a bitch." I work for a small newspaper company, and I usually just write about things happening in the community. One story though got me particularly interested, and it was about a woman who lived in filth. Her neighbours had been complaining about odd foul smells coming from her house. It isn't the type of story that I usually do, but it was different, and that's what got me interested. When I got to her house, I could clearly see from the front of the house how filthy it all was. The thought of going inside started to become a regrettable decision. I mean, first encounters count, right? And I didn't mean to be so judgmental straight away, but looking at her house, it gave off the sort of impression that this was a person who didn't look after herself that much. I also talked with some of the locals, and what they told me about her didn't give off a good judgment of character. This woman was clearly out of touch with everything around her. At the same time, I wanted to know more about her, and me, being a nosy person, I couldn't help but wanting to know more about her. Clearly, something had happened in her life to make her live like this. I had already called her to make sure she was okay with me looking into her life, and she agreed to show me her way of life and to explain to me why she lives the way she does. The filth had a stench, and I was surprised that she hadn't died from any bacteria, because it seemed like the right environment for bacteria and viruses to survive. Her mental state was questionable, and she had old cassette players and VHS players all over the place, which don't really exist anymore. When I asked her why she lived like this, all that she could tell me was that as long as filth smelled like the way it should, it was all good. Everything was a mess, and I don't know why, but it kind of all got me being grateful for all the things I had in my life. On the other hand, I am sure someone with OCD would love to clean every speck of this place, and with everything out of order, it told me that her life must have been out of control. Things were broken, and she survived on government benefits and some inheritance from her parents. I could hear small things moving around, and they must have been rats or some other animal. It's weird how animals can survive in such mess. I guess their immune system must be better than ours, Actually, maybe this woman's immune system might be amazing at this point because she has survived this long in this mess. She told me about her mother and father. She was brought up in a 5-bedroom house. She also had 2 younger siblings, and after she had told me that she had siblings, I quickly assumed that her siblings had wanted nothing to do with her, which I was gravely wrong about. I tried asking more questions about her upbringing, but all she told me was, "Just go to the house of my childhood and notice how the filth gives off an amazing aroma." I then went to her childhood home, and I could clearly see that it had been abandoned for many years, and Mother Nature had clearly took over the house. It's sad how houses begin to go under after they had been abandoned, and it reminded me of the only thing I had remembered in my sociology class before I changed courses to journalism. It's people that give meaning to buildings and materialistic things, not the object itself. I kicked the door down as I could clearly see that the front door was past its prime. From what the house looked like, I had expected odour and stench to hit my nose, but instead I got to smell the most amazing aroma I had ever smelt in my life. I then started searching her childhood home for anything interesting to find. This woman's childhood home was exactly like her own house, and I don't know why, but I started to become irritated by this woman. In my generation, we are finding it difficult to even buy a home, and even if someone from my generation has managed to somehow buy a home, it's hard to keep it maintained. Yet this woman has managed to live in a big childhood home as well as having her own home, which clearly she had decided to neglect it. It's unfair, but I guess life is just unfair. It was all a mess, and I was beginning to find it all predictable with the neglect of having any care or pride in one's own life. Maybe her parents were abusive, and I wondered more about her siblings, because now I wanted to know why she was so alone in the world. We all need someone, no matter who we are, but then again, loneliness is a big problem in Western civilization, and we even have someone in the government whose main job is to tackle things like loneliness. Loneliness becomes more apparent as we get older, and this woman was old now, and with the inventions of social media and computer games, it's made loneliness even more stronger. The only good but odd thing about this woman's childhood home is the nice aroma and smell. I decided to follow the aroma because I couldn't resist it anymore. The aroma could be smelt the most from behind the sofas. And you know how in cartoons, when one cartoon character follows a pack of sweets, all lined up because it was being set up? That's what happened to me. When I looked behind the sofas, I gasped with horror and with utter disbelief, because I never thought that I would ever look upon something so disgusting and completely random. I saw 4 skeleton bones, still giving off a perfume-like scent. And this is not the type of smell you would think death could give off. I mean, with an amazing smell present, you would think something was full of life to give such a scent. I went back to see the woman, and I didn't call the police just yet because I wanted to know more, and I wanted her permission first of how to proceed with everything that I had just found. When I told this woman of filth, of what I had experienced in her childhood home, she started tearing up. Instead of calling the police, she just turned on the VHS player, and I started to watch something. Like an explanation video. At the same time, I also have to shamefully admit, finding all of this would have progressed my career in the journalism world. Even though I had just found something terrible, my career coming to my mind showed how I could have profited from this. Anyhow, the video told me more things about what was really going on. Hello, my name is Dr. Rogerson Peake. I have invented a pill that could make any dead person smell nice. When a body starts decomposing, it usually starts to smell. But with this pill, a decomposing body will be the most sweet-smelling thing you have ever smelt. The cassette player kept on playing. After watching the whole video, a few thoughts came to mind. Yes, the pill would give the dead person a bit more dignity by smelling nice. And it will also help people who deal with dead bodies, like in hospitals. But at the same time, this might be a great advantage for a murderer or serial killer. Imagine someone had murdered someone in your home, but the murdered person had this pill before being murdered. It could be some time before you notice something is off. Something smelling nice usually doesn't give an image of death or tell you that something is decomposing. It's always the nasty smell which makes us think something is off. Like when I was in this woman's childhood home, I honestly didn't think I would find something to be dead. Do you see how this might be an advantage for a serial killer or murderer? And I started to understand why this woman lived like the way she lived now for such a long time. I felt bad for being so judgmental or for thinking about my career gain of this whole story. I also started to glue together who those skeletons belonged to. From common sense, those skeletons behind the sofa in her childhood home must have been her 2 parents and 2 siblings. And I thought they had just abandoned her because of the way she had lived her life. Is someone trying to kill you? I asked this woman. My whole family took part in the experiment to eat the pill. We were struggling for money at the time, and they promised us that they would pay us lots of money to eat the pill. They weren't 100% honest with us, and none of us knew what the pill was made for exactly, she told me. She started crying a little bit, and the more I understood her story and why she lived the way she did, it was sad, just so sad. How we humans can be so unsympathetic or not care enough to understand someone but rather to judge and cast aside. After taking the pill, one midnight someone broke into my home and I was just a child back then, and this man had murdered my mother, father and both my siblings. I hid in a secret wall cupboard in my room, which my father had built. For weeks this strange man who broke into my house observed my whole family's dead bodies. They all started to smell nice as they decomposed. I overheard his talk on the phone, and they wanted to use this pill in war and other scenarios where death is common, but they wanted to hide the deaths and murders. If something smells nice, no one would ever think something has died, she explained to me. She managed to escape when the strange man went for a smoke in her garden, and I couldn't believe what I had just been told. This story was not just a story, but probably one of the biggest scandals in the 21st century. I had to write about this and get this story out, and I phoned the police about the 4 skeletons in this woman's childhood home. Something had to be done, and we all know how shady the government can be and some of the things they can be capable of. This woman deserved justice. I hugged her and she pleaded me not to go to the police, but obviously I decided to go against her. I went back to my flat, and as soon as I entered, a beautiful scented aroma hit my nose. But I never sprayed anything inside my flat recently. I checked my whole flat and I found a dead body in my bathtub. The dead body had a note attached to it, which read, "Be wary of your steps, lad." I straightaway drove to the woman's house, and this time, instead of the scent of filth hitting my nose, it was a perfume-like aroma, and I knew she had been murdered in her own living room. There was a note on her body which read, "We are watching, and the dead body in your flat has been taken now." And I couldn't believe it. I checked her childhood home, and everything inside had been taken, and no sign of police of any kind. They knew I would check on this woman after finding a dead body in her apartment, as well as her childhood home. I am being watched now.